In the center of Göbekli Tepe stands a limestone pillar carved with a vulture, a scorpion, several birds, a headless man, and shapes no one can translate with certainty. For years, people treated it like a message waiting to be decoded. Then digital analysis found something more unsettling. The symbols were not scattered at random. The buildings around them followed a plan. The pillars were shaped like human bodies, and the animals repeated in patterns, dominated not by peaceful prey, but by snakes, foxes, boars, vultures, and other creatures linked with danger, death, and transformation. Göbekli Tepe was not simply decorated with wildlife. It was designed as a gathering of beings. Some were human, some were animal, and some may have stood somewhere between the two. The site lies on a limestone ridge in southeastern Turkey, near the modern city of Şanlıurfa. Its earliest monumental buildings were raised around 9600 BC, more than 11,000 years ago. That is thousands of years before Stonehenge, before the pyramids, before metal tools, before writing. Its builders lived at the beginning of the Neolithic, when communities were becoming more settled, but still relied heavily on hunting and gathering. They quarried limestone from the ridge, shaped it into T-pillars, and placed them inside circular or oval buildings with two taller pillars at the center. Some rose more than 5 meters high. Why would hunter-gatherers invest so much labor in monuments this large? And who, or what, were the pillars supposed to represent? If ancient symbols and sites that refuse to explain themselves are why you are here, subscribe and turn on notifications. Because the first result of the modern analysis was not a translation. It was the discovery that the stones themselves were bodies. Several pillars carry carved arms running down their sides. The hands meet across the front. Some show belts, buckles, and hanging garments. The broad top forms a head. The long shaft forms a torso. The T-shaped pillars are not merely supports. They are simplified human figures. The two tallest stand in the center of each enclosure, surrounded by smaller pillars and stone benches. The architecture resembles an assembly frozen in place. But the central figures have no carved faces, no eyes, no mouths, no names. Their bodies are present, but their identities are hidden. A detailed face represents one individual. A faceless body can represent an ancestor, a supernatural being, a role, or something larger than one person. The surrounding animals make the scene even harder to understand. Snakes twist across the stone, foxes run along the sides of pillars, wild boars bare their teeth, vultures spread their wings. Aurochs, gazelles, insects, spiders, and birds appear in different combinations from building to building. A systematic study counted nearly 200 animal images, although the total changes depending on how groups of snakes are counted. These are not calm landscapes. Predators and dangerous animals appear with unusual frequency. Teeth are exposed, claws are visible, snakes cover entire surfaces. The builders were not carving a record of everything they hunted. They selected animals with power, animals that attacked, animals that consumed the dead, animals that crossed between ground, air, darkness, and open sky. At the center of Building D is Pillar 43, sometimes called the Vulture Stone. Its surface contains one of the most complicated scenes at the site. A large bird approaches a circular object. Below it appears a scorpion. Other birds and animals fill the remaining space. Near the bottom is a small human figure with an erect penis and no visible head. Beside the body is what may be a detached head or another round object. The scene has inspired claims that the pillar is a star map, an ancient calendar, or a record of a comet impact at the beginning of the Younger Dryas. The most dramatic version says the animals represent constellations and encode the date of a catastrophe remembered for thousands of years. It is an extraordinary theory, but that explanation has serious problems. There is no agreed evidence that the builders recognized the same constellations later used by Greek, Roman, or modern astronomers. The proposed date is earlier than the strongest archaeological dates for the enclosure, and choosing a few animals while ignoring dozens of other carved pillars can create patterns the original builders never intended. No artificial intelligence has translated Pillar 43. The carvings are not a known written language. A computer can compare shapes, count symbols, test alignments, and identify repetition. It cannot recover a lost meaning without a key. But rejecting the catastrophe theory does not make the pillar ordinary. The grounded interpretation may be more disturbing. The headless man, the vulture, and the scorpion may belong to a world concerned with death, bodies, and transformation. Vultures consume flesh and leave bone behind. In later cultures, they became connected with exposure of the dead and movement between earth and sky. That does not prove the same ritual happened at Göbekli Tepe. But human remains from the site show that skulls and bodies mattered. Researchers identified fragments of human skulls with deliberate cuts, and in one case, a drilled hole. The marks suggest that some skulls may have been modified after death for display or ritual treatment. No complete skull cult has been reconstructed, and no one knows whether the headless figure refers to the same practice. But death was not hidden from the symbolic world of Göbekli Tepe. It may have been placed at its center. Then modern spatial analysis exposed a second pattern. Researchers mapped the main enclosures and examined the position of their central pillars. Buildings B, C, and D appear to have been laid out so that their centers form a near equilateral triangle. The finding suggests that the three structures may have been conceived together as one planned project, rather than growing accidentally over many generations. The builders had to choose points, maintain distances, organize labor, and preserve the relationship between structures before the walls were complete. They needed no modern mathematics, only chords, stakes, repeated measurements, and a shared plan. Göbekli Tepe was once presented as an impossible monument created by simple wanderers with no organization. The geometry shows why that picture fails. These people could plan at the scale of an entire ceremonial complex. They could coordinate quarrying, move pillars weighing several tons, and preserve a design across separate buildings. They also altered the buildings over time. Walls were repaired, pillars were moved or reused. New structures replaced older ones. Some enclosures were eventually filled with stone, soil, animal bone, and debris. This backfilling was once described as a deliberate burial, but the newer picture is more complicated. Different buildings had different histories. Some were modified repeatedly. Some were damaged. Some were filled gradually or closed after their use ended. There may never have been one moment when every monument was buried together. Göbekli Tepe was not built in one impossible burst and then hidden. It was used, repaired, transformed, and remembered across centuries. And the strongest clue to that lived experience appeared in 2023. Archaeologists uncovered a life-sized limestone statue of a wild boar inside Building D. It stands on a stone bench between carved pillars, with traces of red, white, and black pigment still visible. The boar was painted, and the pillars may have been too. The pale stones visitors see today are stripped remains. Originally, the enclosure may have been filled with color, firelight, bodies, sound, food, smoke, and movement. On the front of the bench beneath the boar are carvings of an H-shaped sign, a crescent, 2 snakes, and 3 human faces, or masks. Again, the signs form a sequence. Again, there is no translation. But their placement shows that individual symbols were combined deliberately. The boar occupied a focal point inside a designed scene. The pillars did not stand like museum objects. People moved around them. They sat or stood on benches. They looked toward the central pair. They passed carved predators at human height. Perhaps food and drink were shared. Perhaps the names of ancestors were spoken. Perhaps skulls or other remains were displayed. Those possibilities cannot be proven. But the architecture was made for experience. That is the third pattern modern research reveals. The meaning was not contained in one symbol. It came from the relationship between the symbols, the pillars, the building, and the people inside it. A fox alone may mean one thing. A fox facing a faceless human pillar may mean another. A vulture above a headless body may transform both. The images worked as a system, and systems are harder to decode than alphabets. An alphabet repeats sounds. This imagery may have repeated stories, identities, rituals, dangers, and relationships known only to the people who gathered there. Some researchers now describe the symbols as a developing visual code, rather than writing. The same animals and signs appear across sites in the wider region. T-shaped pillars have been found at Karahan Tepe, Sayburç, and other early Neolithic settlements. This proves Göbekli Tepe was not an isolated miracle. It belonged to a larger cultural landscape, extending across southeastern Anatolia and northern Syria. Ideas and symbols moved between communities. At Sayburç, carved scenes place humans and dangerous animals together in what appears to be a narrative. The related sites change the central question. Archaeologists can now study a network of communities, experimenting with buildings, images, gatherings, and new forms of social life. Göbekli Tepe was exceptional. It was not alone. Now, did digital analysis reveal a hidden warning carved into the pillars? Not in the way viral titles suggest. There is no verified AI translation saying the builders predicted a comet, flood, or end of the world. There is no dictionary for the symbols. There is no inscription naming the figures or explaining the ceremonies. But the results are still disturbing. The pillars are human bodies without faces. They stand among predators, snakes, vultures, and headless figures. Actual human skulls were cut and modified after death. Buildings were arranged through deliberate planning. Powerful animal images were repeated across a wide cultural region. And all of this appeared while human life itself was changing. People were becoming more settled. Communities were growing. Wild plants and animals were moving toward domestication. Larger groups had to cooperate, remember rules, share resources, settle disputes, and define who belonged. Monumental architecture may have helped make that possible. The buildings brought people together. The symbols gave them a shared world. The rituals may have turned strangers into a community. But any system that defines belonging also defines exclusion. Any image that protects can threaten. Any ancestor who gives authority can be used to control the living. Göbekli Tepe may record the moment human beings learned to build society, not only with houses and food, but with memory, fear, spectacle, and sacred power. The site was not a stone newspaper reporting one disaster. It was a place where people created a reality together. The animals were part of it. The dead were part of it. The faceless pillars were part of it. And the people standing between them completed the image. Today, only a fraction of Göbekli Tepe has been excavated. More structures remain beneath the mound. Future imaging may reveal additional buildings. New software may identify repeated carving methods, workshop traditions, or connections invisible to the human eye. But even perfect scans cannot recover the voices of the builders. We can measure every pillar. We can map every line. We can count every snake, fox, bird, and boar. We can reconstruct the geometry of the enclosures, and still not know what happened when people entered them. That is the final result of analyzing Göbekli Tepe. The carvings are not meaningless. They are full of meaning. The problem is that the world needed to understand them disappeared more than 11,000 years ago. The pillars remain. The animals remain. The headless figure remains. But the people who knew what they were seeing left no translation. And beneath the hill, more of their story is still waiting. The next investigation is waiting on screen now.